Hi, welcome to Green Phoenix RPG, a weekly Dungeons & Dragons podcast from both sides of the screen. I'm your host, Matt, and this is our first episode, The Brewing Storm. Now, we had our introductory episode a little while ago. It came out, and that kind of went over what this podcast is going to be about, and, some pretty good detail, but I want to give you a little bit of a recap just in case you missed that. What this podcast is really going to be at its core is a recap of a campaign I ran from about 2012 to 2017. And we're going to be looking at that from both the Dungeon Master's perspective behind the screen and the player's perspective in front of the screen. So we're going to have episodes like this, which are a narrative recap of a session. This episode, we're actually going to be recapping the very first session of the campaign. And then we're also going to have behind the screen episodes where we talk about what the DM, what I really did to get that session up and running. What planning I put in, what mechanics were involved, what was the narrative structure, where was I going with the plot, how I linked it together, really kind of everything behind the scenes to get that running. And then we're also going to have episodes where the players are on. Next episode, actually, our very first player, Nate, who plays the main character here for quite a while in the campaign, is going to be on talking about his opinions of the first session. And we're also going to talk a little bit about the collaboration between player and dungeon master overall in this podcast, as well as specifically next episode with Nate here. Because Dungeons & Dragons is a very unique game when it comes to gaming, because there isn't someone just running the game, and there aren't just people playing it. Everyone is working together to make the game work. It's all about collaboration. The players really have to say to the DM, this is the kind of game we want. We want a high adventure game, or a horror game, or a mystery game, or politics, or whatever it is. As well as the themes. Maybe they want to have a game that's a little more mature, or a little more silly, whatever it is. As well as we'll get into some more descriptions on, structures of games too. That's always very important. But the players and the DM have to come together and make these decisions, and then even beyond just making this decision when the game starts, it's something that has to be reinforced as the story progresses over and over again. Players will tell the DM what they want in a story. The DM will tell the players what he's trying to do in a story, what she's trying to do in a story, and they work together to really make that work in harmony. So many podcasts or YouTube channels or articles on the web will talk about how to improve your game as a DM, what to do to motivate your players, or as a player, really how to get the most out of role-playing, and really how to help the DM move the game along. But no one really talks about it in specifics. No one says, this is exactly what we did in the campaign, this is exactly how it worked, here's how it worked later in the game, 6 sessions down the road, or a year later, this issue rose up again, or the way we solved it caused problems later. So this podcast is really going to talk about that specifically because we're going to be using an actual campaign that's already over. So I know now, looking back, what worked, what didn't work. And I can really tell you, what I was thinking at the time when I implemented it, and then really we can look and see how it really worked out together. And we can even say, did this work, did it not work? Or really have you put into your own campaigns and then come back and let me know how it works. There's a lot of tips I use, a lot of strategies I use that I really think work well, that I really hope you guys will like to use in your campaigns as well. So like I said, this is going to be a narration episode. This is going to be talking about the very first session we ran. This campaign for the first 2 story arcs was a one-on-one campaign with myself and the player Nate. So I set this up as a arc structure, and we'll get into a little more detail what that actually is. But basically, each arc was kind of self-contained. It would have its own separate conflict, sometimes its own separate villain, so it would have a start and an end. And every arc that finished would then bleed very organically into the next arc. So whatever consequences of the choices that were made, completing the conflict, not completing the conflict, what that would do for the next arc, would then bleed into the next, and the next, and the next, so forth and so on. So that will be discussed a lot more in a behind-the-scenes episode when we talk about narrative structure. So this game, like I said, is a one-on-one campaign for a while, with just myself and Nate for about the first 2 arcs. It's about maybe a year out of game time and a few months in game time. But before we get into the actual narrative structure, I just wanted to give you a quick little idea of what this campaign is really going to be about. This campaign started very simply. I think Nate describes it almost as classic in later episodes, and I think that's really the feel we're going for. But it really kind of shifts and becomes a lot more nuanced and a lot more my style as we move along. We kind of move away from that. This campaign is really about a lot of things. Elvish culture in my game has suffered a massive disaster, a cataclysm. Their old country is destroyed, gone. It's now a dark and twisted place, desolate, ominous, mysterious. And their new culture is led by a cowardly, xenophobic council. The elves are really outcasts in this country, in this world, really. You don't see elves much. The ones you do, people distrust them completely. But the elves harbor a great, great, and terrible secret that is very important for the rest of the world to know, but the elves are never going to share it with anyone. Our hero is a simple man doing a simple job, living in the town of Cerulean, a port city in the human kingdom of Amarant. And in the course of his duties, he is going to stumble upon this secret the elves are keeping. He is going to come across, because of this secret, a war that has been brewing for centuries, that no one else knows is even happening. Through his travels, he's going to come across the murder of a god. He's going to come across unspeakable horrors and great evil. And he is going to come across a grave mistake that was committed centuries ago. And he's going to find the people responsible for that mistake, and he's going to find the people who are able to fix it. And in the course of this campaign, he is going to decide the fate of the world. A simple man doing a simple job that becomes extraordinary. So with that being said, please enjoy the first episode. We're going to go right into the narration. And we're going to, like I said, have Nate on next episode, who's going to talk with us a little bit about collaboration and character creation and world building. And then our third episode, we're going to have myself talking about our first session in kind of more of a behind-the-screens way. Talk about the narrative structure and really what I was doing to get this first session started and really where my mind was at. So, without any further ado, let's get right to it. So, our game begins with our main character, our hero, Tiber, standing aboard the Albatross, a ship in service to the Stillwater family, the ruling family of Cerulean, the only port town in the country of Amarant to the southwest. Tiber is a young man, about 19, with a pale, ruddy complexion, a stern expression, and strong jaw. He has wavy black hair, brown eyes. He is wearing his father's breastplate, and has an ironwood shield and a bastard sword gifted to him by his master, Sir Dominova, on his back. Tiber is currently working as a guard for the Stillwater family, something his father's done for as long as Tiber can remember. But his father, Marcus, has really been trying to have Tiber take more responsibility, as Marcus is really trying to retire, or at least semi-retire. He wants to spend more time with Tiber's younger siblings, and Tiber is eager to pick up the slack and really wants to prove himself. So now he's been assigned as a guard to Albert Stillwater, the eldest son of the Stillwater family, as he travels southwest to the Serpent's Grin Islands to speak with the Ichirokan people. The Ichirokan people have fruit, game, fish, spices, a lot of things the Ceruleans don't have access to. The Ceruleans have always really wanted to open a large trade agreement with the Ichirokans. They've traded it in small scale, a bit here, a bit there, but never a large-scale, real trade agreement. Even though Albert's father has tried for a very long time, decades, to do so. Albert thinks that he might be able to do this, being an accomplished negotiator himself and diplomat. He's really looking to get out of his father's shadow, prove himself, so that when his father does pass away, he can confidently take the ruling position of Cerulean. Tiber leans over the railing of the Albatross, looking down at the ocean. The spray of salt water hits him in the face, the waves crash against the boat. the crying of the gulls in the air, the crisp sea air. Tiber has always liked the ocean, and boats. But he knows as a guard this is probably the least tactical place he could be at the moment. If they were attacked, there's no way to outmaneuver enemies, nowhere to run, really no escape. Tiber looks up with this thought in his head as he sees a ship approaching very quickly with red sails, marking it as an Ichirokan vessel. He turns to warn the captain, who's distracted talking to Albert, when the boat slams into the albatross, lurching it to its side. Arrows start flying across the bow. Tiber runs and tackles Albert, interjecting his shield above while flaming arrows slam into it. The captain begins shouting out orders, trying to get everyone to turn the ship to the starboard side to head towards an island nearby. They manage to disengage from the Ichirokan vessel, trying to outrace them to the island. The captain runs the ship aground and quickly tries to get everyone off. He wants to reach the tree line as quickly as possible before the Ichirokans can surround them. Unfortunately, the crew of the Albatross is too slow. By the time they all hit sand and start running towards the jungle, the Ichirokans have already landed and surrounded them. Albert steps forward, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender, looking at the semicircle of Ichirokan warriors leveling spears and bows at them. He tells them they bear them no ill will and demands to know what this is in regards to. The leader of the Ichirokan steps forward, a young woman about Tiber's age, with curly black hair that falls past her shoulders. She's wearing a red tabard, has a white mantle decorated with white and red feathers, hooded, and long leather sandals, at least up her calves. She has a bow and arrow on her back, and has the same chestnut brown skin as the rest of her people, with a distinctive hook nose and almond-shaped eyes. Tiber looks at her, confused why this woman is in charge of this band considering how young she is, and Tiber also has to admit that she is quite attractive. She steps forward and explains to Albert that they do apologize for attacking the Albatross, but a Cerulean ship has sank many Ichirokan vessels in the last few days. However, they do realize that this Cerulean vessel was not crewed by humans, but instead crewed by lizard folk. Albert is shocked by this, thinks about the implications, but says to this woman, Princess Kirika, that that would be impossible. A, lizard men don't have any ships. B, he doesn't know any Cerulean ships are missing if the lizard folk tried to hijack or steal one. And C, lizard men don't know how to sail. Kirika shrugs and explains that she is the crown princess of the Ichirokan people, and she would not lie. While these facts that Albert says may be true, it remains that the lizard folk have taken a ship, have sailed it, and have sank Ichirokan vessels. Albert is greatly distressed by this. Kirika again apologizes for the misunderstanding and offers to help repair the Albatross. In return, though, she asks that Albert spare at least one man, as she needs to head to the jungle to check the necropolis on this island, the most holy site of the Ichirokan people. Albert agrees, trying again to maintain peaceful relationships with these people to hopefully foster a trade agreement, and offers Tiber to go with her. Tiber agrees, and her bodyguard Ichika, and Tiber head into the jungle. As they pick through the foliage and dense vegetation, Tiber asks Kirika about this necropolis they're going to. Kirika explains that the Ichirokan people practice a form of ancestor worship, and this necropolis is based in a mountain, Mount Karyok. Mount Karyok is hollow, and the Ichirokans, over the course of many generations, has carved alcoves all on the inside, mummifying and burying their ancestors inside for as long as she can remember, generations upon generations. She also says that atop this mountain lived the Karyok themselves, who act not as gods so much for the Ichirokans, but angels or divine emissaries. They have the bodies of snakes and the top half of women with rainbow-colored wings and are huge, 20, 30 feet long, with great booming melodic voices. They don't appear much, the Karyok, to the Ichirokan people, but the Ichirokans depict them in art very often, so Kirika knows what they look like, but they're mentioned in stories, myths, legends, and she knows that some of her people have actually seen them. She knows they exist. Tiber shrugs. He's not one much for the gods or religion, really, but he respects her culture and wants to make a good impression, so he just nods along. He's much more interested in the necropolis, as opposed to fanciful tales of snake women. Eventually, they reach the tree line and see Mount Kerok in the distance. Tiber can see that there is actually an entrance carved into the mountain, leading presumably to this necropolis that Kirika was talking about. Unfortunately, outside are 4 lizardmen standing guard. Kirika turns to Tiber and asks if he will fight for her. Tiber regards her curiously and says, of course. Since Albert has ordered him to protect her, that is what he intends to do. She smiles, and the 3 of them charge the lizard folk. Tiber realizes very quickly that Kirika is a cleric and wields powerful divine magic in combat. Tiber, being trained almost since birth with the sword, makes quick work of the lizard folk with Kirika's support. Unfortunately, Ichka, being a man from the Serpent Spring Islands with little training, does the best he can but is gravely wounded in the battle. It's not life-threatening, but it does hamper his movement. Tiber and Kirika convince him to remain outside as a lookout for them, and the 2 of them head inside. When Tiber enters the necropolis, he looks around and sees that Kirika was not lying. Almost every inch of the inside of this mountain, this cavernous space, is covered with alcoves. 3 feet high, maybe 6 feet long each, and each contains the mummified corpse of an ancestor of the Ichirokan people. In the center of this hollow space is a temple of some sort, maybe 20 feet high, not very large by cerulean standards, but seeing it here dwarfed inside this hollow mountain, it is rather awe-inspiring, even to Tiber, such a practical man. Unfortunately, as they walk forward, their footsteps echoing through this mountain, they can hear the dark and strange language of arcane casting echoing from this temple. They approach the door and peer inside. The room inside is empty, save one sarcophagus, on which lays a mummified woman clutching a chalice to her chest. Hunched over this body is a figure clad in black robes, chanting and waving his hands in arcane motions, the dark energy of his spell clashing with the white runes that surround the body, protecting it. Tiber steps forward brashly and points his sword at this figure, demanding he step away from the corpse. The figure turns, and Tiber realizes that it's an elf. His ears are pointed almost to the top of his head, and he wears a featureless iron mask with only one eye hole on his left eye. He looks at Tiber, looks at Kirika, and his expression changes to indifference, as much as Tiber can tell by looking at the one eye hole. He then turns back to the body and continues his spell. Tiber again demands that he steps away from the body, but the elf ignores him. So Tiber hefts his sword and charges with a battle cry. The elf casually flicks his hand over his shoulder, dark energy washing out from him, smashing into Tiber. Tiber is hit with waves of terror beyond anything he's ever known. Demons and terrible images flood his vision. He staggers to his knees and drops his sword, clutching his head. The elf then makes a grand gesture, finishing his spell, shattering the white runes around the body. He then steps forward, plucks the chalice from the mummified corpse's hands as if taking a berry from a bush, waves his hand in a circular motion, opening a portal to some dark and weird landscape. Steps forward, the portal winks shut. Kirika rushes to Tiber and helps him up, gathering his sword. The 2 of them stagger from the temple out into the mountain itself. And outside, they hear a truly terrifying sound as Tiber's unnatural terror fades away. The groaning and moaning and shuffling of all the Ichirokan dead, all the revered ancestors rising from their eternal slumber and shuffling towards them. The 2 rush as quickly as they can outside of the mountain, falling to their knees outside, tripping on the uneven ground. They look up, and in front of them is a Karyok, just as Kirika had described. A long snake tail with the body of a woman and rainbow-colored wings. She's huge, larger than anything Tiber's ever seen. She speaks in a melodic voice, beautiful and booming. She casts a spell herself, points to the doorway, and a white shimmering light flashes inside the mountain, and all the Ichirokan ancestors fall and lay still. She looks down at Tiber and Kirika and beckons for both of them to stand. Kirika staggers to her knees but goes no further. Tiber stands and regards the woman curiously. Woman, he thinks in his head, an odd way to describe this creature. She introduces herself as Marangora, a Karyok. She apologizes for the grand entrance, but She had felt a disturbance down here in the mountain. She explains that the necropolis was not built here by accident. The necropolis is unfortunately built over the site of a great unholy energy. The Karyok encouraged the Ichirokans to bury their dead here and to help sanctify the place. The chalice was unfortunately the chalice of Queen T'Choa, the greatest of all the Ichirokan ancestors. With the chalice's aid, Queen T'Choa, even in death, helped maintain and seal this unholy energy away, focusing the rites, the rituals, and the prayers of Ichirokan people, binding the unholy energy and keeping it far, far away. Now with the chalice gone, there's only a matter of time until this evil bursts from this place. The dead swarm over the islands, and then north to Cerulean, and to Amarant at large. Kirika gasps at the mention of Queen T'Choa, obvious recognition flashing over her face. Tiber glances to her and then back to Marangora, trying to stay practical and pragmatic in the face of such an awe-inspiring religious figure, such a majestic creature. But he asks her, how long do they have? But Marangora doesn't know. Weeks at most, she guesses. She and her companions on top of the mountain will do the best they can to contain this energy, but they know they cannot. The chalice was the only way to do so. Eventually, this is going to happen. The dead will rise, and the islands will be lost. Tiber asks what they can do, and Marangora shrugs. The only thing they can do: retrieve the chalice, bring it back, re-sanctify the necropolis. Without that, they are doomed. She then takes her leave and flies back to Mount Karyok to speak with her companions. Ichika and Kirika watch her go, their mouths agape in awe and religious zeal. Tiber watches her go, but then stoops and picks along the lizardfolk bodies, trying to find clues as to what is happening here. He then realizes that each of the lizardfolk's shields are ironwood shields, almost exactly like the one he carries himself. And he knows that unfortunately there is only one place that they could have gotten those, and that concerns him greatly. So this was our first episode. This was really, like we said, an introductory episode. I was really trying to get Nate invested in the plot right from the get-go, so I gave him a good mystery, a fight that he could win, kind of get used to playing Tiber in a combat situation, really get him confident in his abilities, and then also to have Tiber kind of have a few moments to shine, for Nate to kind of play him, give him some role-playing, to kind of really get everything moving and jiving. You know, you really want to end a session, if you can, it's really helpful, with either some new information being presented, or a mystery, or a cliffhanger, something that really snags the players at the end and really wants them to come back and really look at it some more. So this one obviously ends with a lot of mysteries. You know, who is this elf? Who is T'Choa? What is this chalice really about? Who is Marangora? You know, Nate was obviously very interested in the Ichirokan culture and in Kirika as well. You know, they're kind of a mystery to the Cerulean people, so he was curious about that. So there's a lot of things for Nate to really kind of pick apart and digest, and really a lot of things that encourage him to come back and keep playing. Like we said, next episode we're going to actually have Nate on, Tiber's player, who's going to talk about his opinions of the first session and kind of the collaboration we had building Amarant and Cerulean, you know, the plot itself, Tiber's backstory, and Tiber mechanically as a character. And also, just like I said, Nate's opinions on that first session, really what he really thought about it. And then episode 3 is going to be my discussion and my opinions on the first session, what I was trying to do, and kind of more of my narrative structure and kind of the game as a whole when we started. So again, please visit our website, greenphoenixrpg.com. We have descriptions of Tiber, Princess Kirika, Albert Stillwater. We have a bit of description of the setting, Cerulean, Amarant, and the Serpent's Grin Islands. You can also find links to our YouTube channel, the podcast, our Facebook page, our Twitter page, as well. You can email us at greenphoenixrpg@gmail.com. Questions, comments, suggestions for future shows. And again, if you enjoyed this podcast, you want us to keep bringing you more of this plot, you want to have the players on, see their thoughts and feelings, and more discussions with me, the DM, about this game from the behind-the-screen aspects, please support this podcast. We have a page up at patreon.com/greenphoenixrpg. You know, if you guys could donate $5 a month, $10 a month, it would really do a lot to help this podcast keep coming out to everybody. So please subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any episodes coming out in the future. Like I said, this is going to be weekly every Monday. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you on the other side.